The lake had always been my escape. Ever since I bought the cabin 5 years ago, it had become the one place where the world made sense: quiet mornings, glass still water, and enough distance from people to breathe. So when I decided to take a last-minute weekend trip back to my cabin, I expected nothing but peace. What I didn't expect was a full-blown invasion. As my truck rolled down the steep dirt road leading to the lake, I noticed something strange: cars. Not one or two, 5 of them, all parked in a sloppy row along the gravel path near my cabin. My cabin, the one clearly marked with private property and no trespassing signs. My first thought was that someone had broken in. My second thought was worse, that this was the work of the HOA. And whenever the HOA was involved, one person was always at the center of the chaos: Karen. She wasn't just any Karen. She was chairwoman of the HOA, self-appointed sheriff of the neighborhood, and someone who thought every inch of the lakeshore belonged to her authority. I parked my truck and stepped out slowly, listening. Music, laughter, the sound of splashing. My heartbeat climbed. I walked around the bend and froze. There, on my private dock, my dock, were strangers. 6 of them, drinking, tanning, swimming, grilling. A full party. And not a single one of them had ever met me. My blood boiled. I marched straight toward them. "Excuse me," I said, loud enough to cut through the music. "Who are you, and why are you on my property?" A woman looked up from her floaty. "We're here for Karen's Lake Day." "Karen's what?" Before I could ask more, someone else shouted, "Karen said the cabin's empty, and the lake area is community space. She told us to enjoy." Of course she did. Of course HOA Karen had invited people to my private cabin, without permission, because she felt like it. I tried to calm myself as I scanned the area. They had dragged my dock chairs into a circle, opened my cooler, taken out my drinks, and even used my grill. My private grill. That was it. "Listen," I said firmly, "this is not community space. This is my private property. You all need to gather your things and leave. Now." They exchanged confused glances. One of them muttered, "Karen said it was fine." "Well, I'm saying it's not," I replied. "And I'm the owner." There was silence. Awkward, uncomfortable silence. Then, begrudgingly, they began to collect their belongings. Some apologized, others grumbled. I didn't blame them, they were following what Karen told them. But the fact they were here at all made my jaw clench. I watched them walk down the path to their cars, ready for this ordeal to be over. Except it wasn't. Not even close. Because 10 minutes later, as I was putting my chairs back where they belonged, I heard a familiar voice screeching from the trail. "How dare you!" Karen stormed down toward the dock, her sunglasses perched like a crown of entitlement. "What do you think you're doing kicking my guests off the lake?" She shrieked. "Your guests," I repeated slowly. "Karen, this is my cabin. My dock. My land." She crossed her arms. "The law governs this entire lakeshore. Your cabin is merely part of the community landscape. It's private property," I emphasized. "You know that." She waved her hand dismissively. "Technicalities. You weren't here, and it's rude to leave prime lake space unused." That was her logic. If I wasn't physically present, my property became community property. "Karen," I said, trying not to explode, "you invited strangers onto my dock, into my space, and let them use my things. That's trespassing." She gasped like I had slapped her. "How dare you accuse me of something illegal?" She shouted. "I did nothing wrong. You are the one harassing my guests. I should call the cops." I gave her a cold stare. "Go ahead." She wasn't expecting that. Her face twisted, but she still whipped out her phone, dialed 911 dramatically, and yelled into the receiver. "Yes, officer. There's a man here threatening my guests at the lakeshore. He's yelling and trying to kick people out." I just stood beside her, arms crossed, letting her rant. She didn't know the truth would hit her like a brick. Within 15 minutes, a police SUV pulled up near the cabin. 2 officers stepped out. Before they could say anything, Karen rushed toward them. "Officers, thank goodness you're here. This man is harassing people on community property." The officers looked at me. "Sir, is this true?" I pulled out my cabin deed from my truck. "Yes, I keep a laminated copy there for one nonsense exactly like this. This is my privately owned cabin, dock, and shoreline," I said calmly. "These were uninvited guests placed here by her. They trespassed." The officers glanced at Karen. "Is that true? Did you invite people onto property you don't own?" Karen faltered. For the first time all day, she hesitated. "Well, the HOA manages the lake area." "No, Ma'am, the officer said firmly. The HOA only manages shared community land. This cabin and the land around it are privately owned. And the "no trespassing" signs are very clear. One of the officers turned to me. Did they leave when you asked them to? Yes, I said. I didn't escalate anything. The officer nodded. Then you're in the right. Karen's jaw dropped to the floor. You must be mistaken, she stammered. This area has always been for the HOA members. No, ma'am, the officer said again. It has never been. And you cannot invite guests onto someone's private property. That is illegal. Karen turned so red I thought she might actually burst into flames. The officers continued, if this happens again, you could be charged. Please do not repeat this. Karen looked humiliated, absolutely destroyed. She didn't say a word as she backed away slowly, her entire world of fake authority collapsing around her. By the time she left, the officers apologized for the disturbance and assured me they would file a record of the trespassing incident. I thanked them, then sat on my dock, finally letting the calm lake wash over my anger. My weekend hadn't started the way I expected, but in a strange way, it was satisfying. Because HOA Karen learned something she should have known a long time ago. My property is not her playground. And no matter how loud she screamed, the lake belonged to me, peacefully, privately, and lawfully. The police SUV rolled slowly down the gravel road toward my lake cabin, red and blue lights flickering across the still water. I stood on the dock, arms crossed, waiting. Behind me, the last of Karen's uninvited guests had already driven away, embarrassed, confused, and apologizing as they left. What they didn't know was that they were pawns in someone else's arrogance. What I didn't know was just how deep Karen's entitlement ran. But everything was about to unfold. As the officers stepped out of the SUV, I could already hear Karen's enraged footsteps stomping down the trail. She burst into view like a storm cloud with sunglasses. There he is, she snapped, pointing at me dramatically. The troublemaker. The one who yelled at my guests. I demand you remove him from community property. The officers looked at her, then looked at me, then at the cabin behind me. Ma'am, one officer asked calmly, you said community property. Yes, Karen shrieked. The lakeshore belongs to the HOA. He is harassing guests who have the right to be here. I took a slow breath. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The older officer turned toward me. Sir, can we see some identification or proof of ownership? I nodded and walked to my truck, pulling out a folder I always keep there, my cabin's deed, land certificate, and property map. Dealing with Karen and the HOA meant I had learned to be prepared. I handed it to the officer. He flipped through the documents carefully, and within seconds, his eyebrows lifted. Ma'am, he said, turning back to Karen, this is privately owned land. Karen blinked. No, that's impossible. The HOA oversees everything around the lake. Not this. The officer tapped the deed with his finger. This man owns the cabin, the dock, the shoreline, and the forested area leading to it. All of it is his property. Karen's mouth fell open. But he wasn't here. It looked empty. We thought it was. The officer cut her off. Empty or not, private property remains private property. Karen's face twisted like she'd swallowed a lemon. He's lying, she insisted weakly. This area was always used by the community, before he showed up. I stepped forward. Karen, I bought this cabin years ago. You've known that since the first HOA meeting I attended. You just don't like that you can't control this piece of land. The younger officer pointed up the trail. I saw the "no trespassing" signs on the way down. They're clearly posted and visible. Did you not see them? Karen hesitated. Well, I assumed those signs were outdated. The officer sighed deeply. Ma'am, you can't assume property is public just because you want it to be. I tried not to smirk, but her expression made it nearly impossible. One officer turned to me. Sir, did you ask the guests to leave before contacting us? Yes, I replied, calmly. They left without argument. And you didn't threaten or harm anyone? No, I simply asked them to get off my dock and out of my cabin area. Karen scoffed. He scared them. He's lying. The officer ignored her. Ma'am, trespassing is illegal. Inviting others to trespass is also illegal. Your guests admitted that you told them this was community land. Karen froze, caught. The officer continued, you misled them, and you put them in a situation where they could have faced charges. Karen went pale. Charges? For enjoying the lake. For entering private property without permission, the officer corrected. This man has every right to ask people to leave his land. The younger officer added, honestly, You might be the one facing consequences if you keep insisting the law controls land it doesn't. Karen's breathing hitched. Her confidence, the weapon she used to intimidate half the neighborhood, was disappearing fast. Well, this is ridiculous, she muttered. Nobody even uses this lake cabin except him. That is irrelevant, the officer said firmly. Ownership doesn't disappear just because someone isn't home. Karen tried another angle. So what now? He gets away with kicking out my guests. That's it. The officer looked at her like she had asked the world's dumbest question. Ma'am, he had the legal right to remove trespassers from his property. He didn't break a single law. Karen clenched her fists. Her voice cracked with disbelief and humiliation. So, you're taking his side? No, the officer said professionally. We're taking the side of the law. And the law is very clear here. Karen looked around helplessly, realizing she had lost. Really lost. The officer handed me back the property documents. Sir, everything seems in order. If someone trespasses again, call us immediately. Will do, I said. Then he turned to Karen. And ma'am, this is your official warning. Do not invite anyone to this property again. Do not claim the WA owns it. If you do, we will have to escalate the matter. Karen's face went from pale to bright red. But it's not fair, she blurted. He gets this beautiful lakefront all to himself and the community gets nothing. I shrugged. Karen, I bought this land with my own money. You could have done the same if you wanted peace and quiet. She glared at me like I had personally destroyed her entire belief system. You think you're special, she snapped. But this isn't over. The WA, the officer interrupted sharply. Ma'am, the WA has no authority here. Do not cause further trouble. That shut her up. Completely. Karen turned on her heel and stomped back up the trail, muttering angrily under her breath. Her voice faded as she disappeared into the trees. Moments later, the police turned to me, their posture relaxing now that the storm had passed. Sorry you had to deal with that, sir, one officer said. I exhaled. You and me both. They shook my hand, got in their SUV, and drove away, the sound of gravel crunching beneath their tires echoing through the quiet evening. When they were gone, I sat down on the edge of my dock. The same dock that had been filled with strangers only an hour earlier. The same dock Karen had declared community property. The lake was calm again. The sun was beginning to set. Peace had finally returned. But more importantly, Karen had finally been put in her place. Not by me, not by shouting or arguing, but by the very thing she always tried to twist in her favor. The law. For the first time ever, she was forced to accept that her WA power didn't reach everywhere. Not my cabin, not my dock, not my lakefront, and definitely not my life. Even after the police left, the echo of their final warning to Karen lingered over the lake like a fading thunderstorm. The air felt lighter, calmer, yet I knew the real story wasn't the police visit. It was what came after. Because Karen wasn't just embarrassed. She was exposed. Exposed as the woman who assumed the lake belonged to her. Exposed as the one who thought every shoreline, every trail, every dock was under her command simply because she chaired the HOA. And now, for the first time, she had been told the truth publicly. Her authority ended where my property began. After the officers drove away, I sat on the dock for a long moment, watching the golden ripples spread across the water. Behind me, the cabin door swung gently in the breeze, the same door strangers had walked through earlier that day without hesitation. I stood up and began fixing the mess Karen's guests had left behind. Chairs were scattered. My cooler was half empty. My grill smelled like burnt sausages. Even my fishing rods had been touched. As I gathered the last of the trash, I heard crunching footsteps behind me. I turned. Karen stood there again, but this time, she wasn't shouting. She wasn't waving her hands. She wasn't full of arrogant confidence. She looked different, small, shaken, almost human. I didn't say anything. I waited. She swallowed hard before speaking. You embarrassed me, she said quietly. I raised an eyebrow. Karen, you embarrassed yourself. She glanced away, flustered, not by anger, but by truth. I didn't think they would actually check the deed. Why? I asked. Did you think the police automatically take your side? For a moment, her lips twitched. Then she admitted, usually they do. That explained everything. Karen had lived her entire life believing rules were flexible as long as she was the one bending them. She believed authority belonged to her simply because she acted like she had it. That property line, she murmured, staring at the dock. The officers were so sure. Like it was obvious. It is obvious, I said. There are signs everywhere. She flinched like she'd been hit. I ignored them. You ignored them because the signs didn't fit your fantasy, I replied. You can't control everything around this lake. She said nothing. A long silence settled between us. Only the water moved. Then she whispered, I didn't know they were trespassing. You didn't bother to ask. Her shoulders slumped. For the first time since I'd known her, Karen didn't look like the HOA queen. She looked like a regular person who'd finally been told, no. Those people, they trusted me, she said softly. I told them the lake area was part of the community. I told them they could use it freely. And you were wrong. She winced again. I took a deep breath. Karen, you crossed a legal boundary. You invited strangers into a place you don't own. Into a place you don't control. And you tried to turn it against me. She blinked rapidly, as if holding back frustration or shame. Maybe both. I didn't want it to go this far, she said. Then you shouldn't have made it go this far. Dash dash dash. A slow breeze swept across the lake, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The sun was dipping behind the treeline, painting the sky in soft orange hues. The same sky Karen had almost brought chaos into. She finally sighed. I'm sorry. The words shocked me more than her earlier screaming. Karen. The HOA Karen. Apologizing. It wasn't loud. It wasn't confident. It wasn't proud. It was real. I nodded once. Good. Now don't do it again. She stiffened slightly, but instead of flaring up, she simply nodded. I won't invite anyone here again. You won't claim this as HOA land again. I won't, she said, almost whispering. And you won't misuse your position. She hesitated, but she nodded. Then she turned around and began walking away, slower than before, leaving behind the last fragments of her shattered entitlement. Dash dash dash. For the next hour, I cleaned the cabin. Every misplaced item was a reminder of just how far Karen had pushed it. Every muddy footprint was proof that property rights weren't just words on paper, they mattered. By the time the stars appeared, the cabin looked like home again. I sat in my wooden chair by the dock and gazed at the moonlight dancing on the water. The peace I came for had finally returned. But inside me, a strange thought moved, not anger, not annoyance, but understanding. Karen's entitlement didn't come from power. It came from fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of being ordinary. Fear that without the HOA, she was just another resident. The moment the police told her she had no authority here, she wasn't angry. She was terrified. Because that was the first time in years someone had stripped her of the illusion of control. Dash dash dash. The next morning, I stepped outside and almost dropped my coffee. On the trail leading to my cabin were 3 things. 1. A basket of muffins. 2. A folded note. 3. A small sign that read, HOA has no jurisdiction beyond this point. I laughed out loud. I opened the note. Karen's handwriting was rushed but readable. Greater than, this is your property. It was wrong of me to act like it wasn't. I apologize sincerely. Karen. No excuses. No justification. No backhanded comments. Just an apology. I shook my head in disbelief. Maybe the police humiliation had actually reached her. Or maybe she finally realized that crossing legal lines wasn't the same as enforcing community rules. Either way, something had changed. Karen had changed. Not completely, she would always be Karen. But at least now, she understood one thing she never had before. Other people's property is not her kingdom. Dash dash dash. Later that day, I sat on my dock again, the water calm, the sun warm on my skin. For the first time, it felt truly peaceful, without fear of strangers using my grill, sitting in my chairs, or claiming my lake as their weekend hangout. The chaos was gone. Karen's control had been shattered. And I finally had my home, my sanctuary, back. The HOA had lost. The law had spoken. And Karen had been forced to face reality. Not through anger. Not through shouting. But through the simple truth she could no longer deny. What's mine is mine. And no HOA Karen can ever take that away again.